Look around your home. Chances are you are surrounded by Samsung products. Your smartphone probably has a Samsung display or a Samsung chip. Your television might be a Samsung. Your refrigerator, your washing machine, your microwave, your vacuum cleaner. The company is everywhere. In fact, Samsung Group accounts for nearly 20% of South Korea's entire gross domestic product. 20%. That is not a company. That is a country within a country. If Samsung were a nation, its economy would be larger than that of Portugal, Greece, and New Zealand. It builds ships. It constructs skyscrapers. It runs hospitals. It sells insurance. It even operates the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa, which was built by Samsung CT. And in the world of semiconductors, Samsung is the only company on Earth that can truly challenge TSMC. While the world obsesses over NVIDIA's artificial intelligence dominance and Intel struggles, Samsung sits quietly in the shadows, manufacturing some of the most advanced chips on the planet, supplying both its own devices and the devices of its rivals. It is the silent giant, the invisible empire, the company that everyone uses and almost no one truly understands. If you think this is just an inspirational rags-to-riches business story, you could not be more wrong. The real history of Samsung is wilder than any movie. It is a story of gambling, smuggling, war profiteering, political blackmail, media manipulation, and the most spectacular personal transformation you will ever witness. The founder of this trillion-dollar empire was not a hard-working visionary who sacrificed everything for his dream. He was a lazy, gambling-addicted playboy who hated studying, hated working, and hated responsibility. He wasted the first 40 years of his life doing absolutely nothing of value. And then, through a series of dark, controversial, and often illegal maneuvers, he built an empire that would come to define a nation. Hit that subscribe button right now. Over the next 5,000 words, I am going to peel back the darkest, untold history of this corporate titan. You do not want to miss what might be the most scandalous business expose you will ever watch or read. Because the truth about Samsung is not in any official biography. It is buried in court records, smuggled out of classified archives, and whispered about in the back rooms of Seoul's oldest coffee houses. Let us begin. Lee Byung-chul was born in 1910 in the small village of Uriong, in what is now South Korea. His family was wealthy. His grandfather was a member of the royal court. His father was a successful landowner and financier. Lee was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and he spent the first 3 decades of his life polishing that spoon with absolutely no ambition whatsoever. He hated studying. He hated school. He hated books. He hated teachers. He was sent to the best schools in Korea and Japan, and he flunked out of every single one. He was sent to Waseda University in Tokyo, one of the most prestigious universities in Asia, and he dropped out before completing his first year. Why? Not because he was too poor to afford tuition. Not because his family needed him at home. Because he was bored. Because he preferred drinking sake and playing cards to attending lectures. Because he was, by every conceivable measure, a professional slacker. His father gave him money to start businesses. Lee took the money and opened a rice mill. It failed within 2 years. He opened a trading company. It failed even faster. He tried his hand at real estate, at shipping, at manufacturing. Every venture he touched turned to dust. By the time he was in his late 20s, Lee Byung-chul had burned through a substantial portion of his family's fortune and had absolutely nothing to show for it. No business, no reputation, no skills, no prospects, just a long string of failures and a growing reputation as the village idiot. His friends laughed at him behind his back. His family whispered about him in hushed tones. His wife, the daughter of another wealthy family, looked at him with something between pity and contempt. Lee Byung-chul was, for all intents and purposes, a total failure in his early years. In your opinion, if someone has absolutely nothing to show for their life by age 30, is there any hope for a comeback? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I will reveal the secret behind his turnaround later on. Because the most remarkable thing about Lee Byung-chul was not his intelligence, not his work ethic, not his business acumen. It was his ability to recognize opportunity in chaos. And chaos was about to arrive in abundance. The year is 1938. Lee Byung-chul is 28 years old. He has failed at everything. He is deeply in debt. His family is losing patience. And then, he has an idea. A small trading company in the city of Daegu, specializing in dried fish, fruit, and noodles. It is a humble business. Unremarkable. The kind of business that 1,000 other merchants in Korea were running at the same time. Lee calls it Samsung. Sam means 3. Sung means stars. 3 stars. It is a name that means nothing and everything. Over the next 7 years, the company grows slowly, steadily, unspectacularly. Lee is learning. He is watching. He is waiting. Then the Korean War breaks out in 1950. The peninsula erupts in flames. Millions die. Cities are leveled. The economy collapses. And Lee Byung-chul sees something that no one else sees. He sees opportunity. During the war, normal supply chains are destroyed. The black market becomes the only market. And Lee dives in headfirst. He begins smuggling. Sugar, textiles, fertilizer, medicine, anything that is scarce, anything that can be bought cheap in one place and sold dear in another, anything that can be moved across borders without the government's knowledge or permission. He is not building a legitimate business. He is building a war profiteering machine. This part of history is almost entirely scrubbed from Samsung's official archives. The company's official biographies mention the founding of Samsung in 1938 and then jump directly to the 1960s, as if the war years were just a quiet period of steady growth. They were not. They were the most profitable and the most morally questionable years of Lee Byung-chul's life. He was not a war hero. He was not a patriotic businessman. He was a smuggler, and he was very, very good at it. By the time the armistice was signed in 1953, Lee Byung-chul had accumulated a fortune. Not a small fortune, a massive fortune. Enough to buy a stake in a commercial bank. Enough to acquire a fertilizer factory. Enough to start building the infrastructure of what would become a global empire. The war that killed millions of Koreans had made Lee Byung-chul a very rich man. He never apologized for it. He never expressed regret. He simply moved on to the next opportunity. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now. You do not want this video to get buried by the algorithm. You would miss the raw truth about how this empire really started. By the 1960s, Lee Byung-chul was one of the richest men in South Korea. But in a country ruled by a military dictatorship, wealth meant nothing without political protection. Park Chung-hee had seized power in a coup in 1961. He was a ruthless, ambitious, and deeply suspicious man. He hated the wealthy business families, the Chaebols, who he believed had profited from the suffering of the Korean people during the war. He saw them as parasites. Lee knew this, and he knew that if he did not make himself useful to the regime would destroy him. The arrangement was simple. You give us money. We let you keep the rest of your money. You build factories. We give you contracts. You export goods. We give you preferential loans. You donate universities and research institutes in our name. We make sure your competitors do not get the same opportunities. It was a classic protection racket. The state was the mafia. The Chaebols were the businesses paying for protection. And Lee Byung-chul was the most willing payer of them all. But even Lee was not prepared for what happened next. In 1966, the government accused Samsung of having smuggled $30 million worth of goods. Lee was arrested. He was interrogated. He was threatened with prison, with confiscation of his assets, with the complete destruction of his life's work. The government made him an offer. Donate your fertilizer factory to the state. Donate your commercial bank to the state. Donate your university to the state. Give us everything, or we will take everything. Lee had no choice. He signed the papers. He watched as the empire he had spent 3 decades building was carved up and handed to his political masters. This is real-life power struggle territory. If you were in Lee Byung-chul's shoes, facing this kind of systemic extortion, would you fight back or surrender to the government? Drop your choice in the comments. Let us see if you are a revolutionary or a pragmatist. Lee chose pragmatism. He surrendered. He paid. He rebuilt. And he learned a lesson that would define the next generation of Samsung leadership. You cannot trust politicians. They are not your partners. They are not your friends. They are predators. And the only way to survive in a world of predators is to become a predator yourself. Lee Byung-chul realized something in the aftermath of his humiliation. Money was not enough. Factories were not enough. Even political connections were not enough. To truly protect his empire, he needed to control the story. He needed to own the narrative. He needed to build a machine that would manufacture public opinion, that would shape what people thought about Samsung, about the government, about the Chaebols, about Lee Byung-chul himself. He needed to own the media. In 1965, Samsung acquired the Jungang Ilbo, one of South Korea's most influential newspapers. It was not a friendly acquisition. It was a hostile takeover. Lee forced the existing owners to sell at gunpoint, using his political connections to pressure the government to approve the deal. He then used the newspaper to launch a relentless campaign of self-promotion. Every day, the Jungang Ilbo published stories about Samsung's contributions to the national economy, about Lee's generosity, about the bright future of Korean industry under the leadership of the Chaebols. The newspaper did not report the news. It manufactured it. Then came TBC, the Tonyang Broadcasting Company, a television network, a radio network, a direct pipeline into the living rooms of every Korean family. Lee Byung-chul did not just want to control what people read. He wanted to control what people watched, what people heard, what people believed. The combination of the Jungang Ilbo and TBC gave Samsung an information monopoly. The company could promote itself. It could attack its rivals. It could influence elections. It could shape government policy. It could do whatever it wanted because it controlled the narrative. This was not just a business strategy. It was a survival strategy. Lee Byung-chul had learned that in a corrupt and authoritarian system, the only way to protect yourself from the predators was to become the one who controlled the information environment. He built an echo chamber, and inside that echo chamber, Samsung could do no wrong. Lee Byung-chul could do no wrong. The Chaebols could do no wrong. And anyone who dared to question the system would find themselves attacked, smeared, and destroyed by the very media outlets that Samsung owned. That is power. That is the dark truth behind the Samsung empire. Lee Byung-chul died in 1987 at the age of 77. He left behind a company that had revenues of over $10 billion, tens of thousands of employees, and a presence in nearly every industry imaginable. From a small trading company in Daegu, he had built a global empire. The lazy, gambling-addicted playboy who had flunked out of university and failed at every business he touched had become the father of modern Korean capitalism. How did he do it? The answer is both simple and profound. Lee Byung-chul understood that there is no such thing as wasted time. Every failure taught him something. Every setback gave him information. Every humiliation hardened his resolve. The 40 years he spent being a slacker, a gambler, a smuggler, a war profiteer, a political pawn, these were not wasted years. They were his education. They were his tuition. They were the crucible in which the Samsung empire was forged. Most business biographies tell you that success comes from hard work, from persistence, from never giving up on your dreams. That is the story they tell to the masses. That is the story they feed to the workers. The real story is much darker. The real story is that success comes from understanding human nature, from recognizing that people are greedy, fearful, and easily manipulated, from learning to exploit those weaknesses, from building systems that take advantage of the flaws in the human psyche. Lee Byung-chul was not a genius. He was not a visionary. He was a master manipulator. And that is why Samsung stands today where so many other companies have fallen. Lee Byung-chul was a complex, controversial devil, but he was also a genius. If you understand him, you understand the deoxyribonucleic acid of every modern corporate empire. The same patterns, the same strategies, the same darkness. Samsung is not exceptional. It is just honest about what it takes to win. If you enjoyed this deep dive, give it a like. In the next video, I will break down how his son, Lee Kun-hee, snatched power from his older brothers, purged the board of directors, and ushered in the golden era of Samsung. The story of the heir is even wilder than the story of the founder. You will not want to miss that. See you next time. This is Auto Archives. We do not build idols. We tear down facades. We show you the bleeding truth. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing behind the curtain. The algorithms do not want you here. But you already knew that.